I want to welcome to the program a friend of mine, a guy I've gotten to know fairly well through the years, an absolute prince of a man, Congressman from Kentucky's 6th District, Andy Barr. Welcome.
Josh, it's great to be with you as a fan of Ruthless podcast and as a friend of yours for many years. Great to be on the program.
Well, listen, we wanted to get your timing is not totally coincidental for this booking. You're the man who knows more about horse racing than anybody in Congress, which, you know, it's good because if you didn't, that would be problematic, right? Being from where you're from. But yeah, we're run up to Derby week.
This is the biggest week for my constituents in the 6th District, Central Kentucky. Churchill Downs is not in my district. It's 70 miles up the road in Louisville. But Lexington, Kentucky, the big city, the largest city that I represent, is surrounded by 400 world-class horse breeding and thoroughbred racing farms. And while Churchill Downs hosts the fastest 2 minutes in sports, the Run for the Roses, this year it's the 148th edition of the Run for the Roses. We say in Central Kentucky, in the bluegrass region of Kentucky, we supply the talent because all of the stallions and mares are very busy in the years leading up to the Derby because they're producing the foals that become the yearlings that ultimately are sold and trained and become the racehorses that end up in the first Saturday in May on that beautiful track in Louisville.
Well, Andy, the good news is the variety program is not going to ask you to describe that process in any form of detail, but I think we know what you're getting at, and you're absolutely right. It is. It's not only part of the culture; it's basically who you are if you're from that region of Kentucky.
Well, that's right, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The economic impact is quite significant. And we host at the Keeneland Racecourse the auction, the yearling sales every September, where literally full yearlings, 1-year-old horses can sell to an international audience, an international buyer group, a multi-million-dollar yearling horses in the hopes that that horse will be a fast runner and ultimately win races like the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, it's obviously it's a huge part of your district. It's a huge part of Kentucky, but it's not just something that everybody just sort of observes and allows to just kind of go on. You actually have been involved in a lot of efforts to try to keep horse racing safe, to try to keep it competitive, the kind of sport people enjoy in the Derby and everything else, because ultimately that's a big part of the economy of the region.
That's right. And let's face it, there's a lot of competition for the entertainment dollar. We want a new generation of horse players, of horse fans, fans of thoroughbred racing. And that is really dependent. The future of thoroughbred racing is dependent on the safety and integrity of the sport. We've had some high profile scandals. We also have some radical animal rights groups out there like PETA that want to shut down our sport. And we need to be cognizant of that, get ahead of that. And that means we need to promote and protect the animal, these beautiful horses that, frankly, are treated better than human beings in some cases in my district.
Yeah.
But the truth is we need to promote the safety and integrity of the sport. And so what I did in a bipartisan way with my colleague Paul Tonko, who represents the Saratoga racetrack very historic racetrack up in upstate New York, we came together and we introduced a bill and worked on it for about 6 to 8 years called the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. We were able to enlist the support of Leader McConnell, your former boss, and Senator Feinstein from California. We passed that bill. It became law. President Trump signed it into law. And now we have a single national uniform medication and racetrack safety program that's being implemented right now. This is not only going to improve and enhance the safety of the sport for both the human and the equine athletes. It's going to ensure that we have a reputation for integrity. So the horse players, people have confidence when they place a wager that they're betting on a drug-free horse. And from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, we're going to have one set of rules. So if you bet on a horse in the Kentucky Derby and then you want to bet on that same horse 2 weeks later in the Preakness Stakes and then 3 weeks later in the Belmont in New York, you're going to know that horse and all the horses in those fields are running under the same set of rules.
Yeah.
and that stands to reason. We wouldn't want to have the NFL or the NBA or the Major League Baseball operating under different rules depending on which city the teams are playing in.
Totally. Well, listen, I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it was an incredibly controversial bill that you did incredible work on to try to get over the finish line, and ultimately became consensus. I mean, today it sounds like absolutely exactly what you should do, but you really had to fight, like you said, for 6 to 8 years or something like that to get it done.
I was inspired by Smug because Smug says,
this is what I wanted to get into.
Yeah. He says that he can take down a horse. I just doubt it. He obviously is not a fan of racing because there's no way he could even catch a Kentucky Thoroughbred.
No, he could not catch. I think he will concede that he can't catch a Kentucky Derby horse. But if you have on the ends of the spectrum, if you've got PETA on one hand, Smug might be on the other, right?
Yeah. I mean, and PETA has nothing to worry about. If you see these, they can hold their own. These stallions can hold their own. There was a great stallion at Three Chimneys Farm in my district called Dynaformer. Dynaformer earned it the hard way. He was not a great racehorse necessarily, and so when he was standing stud, he was first given mares that didn't have a very good pedigree, but he kept producing through those lower tier mares great runners. And so he started breeding the better and better mares with better pedigrees over the years and became a champion stallion. Ultimately, he sired Barbaro, which was a famous racehorse that won the Derby and the Preakness. But here's the thing about Dynaformer. Dynaformer was a mean horse, big, gigantic stallion. He bit off the finger of his groom. So PETA has nothing to worry about. These stallions and these horses, these thoroughbreds, especially when they're breeding, they can hold their own.
So how much time do you give Smug from entering the field with Dyna to him laying flat on his back?
He has no shot against Dynaformer. Dynaformer regrettably has gone to horse heaven, but these there are other stallions and horses. He wouldn't want to be in the same in the same paddock with these horses.
Yeah, he has somewhat of a controversial view of horses, right? He's big on junkie horses. He thinks he could take horses. I think what we need to do is get him down there and trot around your district a little bit. He may have a reformed view of all of that.
Well, I heard that you had on your program my ranking member, my good friend Patrick McHenry. Yeah. He was recounting his encounter with a rabies infected flock. So,
yeah, I mean, do you guys have to take any like prophylactic committee action to make sure he's not infecting anybody after that situation?
Well, COVID taught us a lot, and we're wearing like spacesuits around Patrick now. We're keeping our social distancing, and we're wearing our masks around him because we know he's had too many interactions with wild foxes on the National Mall.
100%. I like a harrowing story, right? But we think he's ultimately responsible for the untimely passing of the fox and all of his family, I guess.
I know. Speaking of PETA, I think given the fact that fox is now in fox heaven, I think PETA might be coming after Congressman McHenry.
That's what I'm thinking. And we discussed it briefly. I think, we'll see. We're going to keep an eye on it. McHenry's not out of the woods yet. So here's the thing. Before we get off horses, we love to bet on things here on the Variety program. We bet on basically everything. We have a partnership with Predict It where we're now even betting on politics. But we really, all of us love to pay attention to horse racing. And I figured if there's one guy who we're going to get some inside tips on, it's you. So, like, what do you got for us, Andy? Is there something?
I can't wait to go. Listen, the caveat up front is that I'm not super great at handicapping, even though I grew up around Keeneland and grew up around horses. But I have my biases, and the favorite, it looks like the morning line favorite for the 148th run for the Roses is a horse called Zandon. I like this horse. It's 3-1 morning line. But again, I'm biased why I like this horse. This horse won the Bluegrass Stakes, the grade one.
Oh yeah, this was like a couple weeks back, right? In Keeneland?
Exactly. And And so the Bluegrass Stakes is the biggest race in my congressional district at the famous Keeneland Racecourse. So we love to see Bluegrass
place, by the way. Beautiful place.
We love to see Bluegrass Stakes winners go on and win the Kentucky Derby. And the horse just looks fantastic in his he's peaking at the right time. He's putting himself in contention without even urging from his jockey. I mean, when you get into a tough field like the Kentucky Derby, if you have the jockey urging on a horse that's doing it on its own, look out. That horse is the favorite for a reason. The other horse, if you want a long shot, if you're a horse player, if you want to put a horse in the money,
like get an exacta going.
Yeah, an exotic bet like an exacta or trifecta, put it in there with a few of the favorites and get some value out of your bet. I like this horse called Tis the Bomb. Tis the Bomb is at 30-1 right now, but I like it, again, biased because the trainer, Kenny McPeak, is a Lexington, Kentucky guy. He knows.
Are you just homering? Are you just giving? This is a homer thing where you're going to go and you're going to tell me everybody who's raised a horse in your district is the favorite, and I'm going to bet on him and lose all my money?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, just to show how much of a homer I am, Tis the Bomb came in second in the Bourbon Stakes. So, I'm the co-chairman of the
going.
Yeah, I'm the co-chairman of the Congressional Horse Caucus and the Bourbon Caucus. I represent the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So anything with Bourbon or Lexington or Keeneland, I am for it.
Well, that's where I'm going next is Bourbon. So this is perfect, but we've got to round out what we got for picks. But I'm afraid what I'm going to be dealing with is some sway back because they pulled off the field of Kentucky and you're betting on them just because of where they're from.
Well, that's how we do it. That's how we do it. Listen, I mean, a lot of times your special lady in your life will go to the track and not look at all at the program. You've been sitting there slaving over the daily racing form, and you're looking at statistics and numbers and past performances and who they've competed against. And you do all this work, over 2-3 hours of handicapping, and you put, $200 on the race, and your horse comes in last, and your date or your wife looks at the colors and likes how pretty
That's
the horse looks.
That has happened to me 100% of the time.
And they win several $1,000s based on the look of the silks of the jockey.
It is. It's humiliating, right? At that point, you just got to turn to the Bourbon.
That's right. But that's what keeps us coming back.
I love it. All right. So we got 2 horses. You got a third to round out our money?
Yeah, so I would, here's the thing. I would go with this horse called Epicenter. The horse has done little wrong in the career and enters the Derby off of a strong win. And he's improved. That's what you want to look for. Horses that are hitting their stride coming in, horses that didn't do very well in the early part of their career, but is coming in hot. Those horses are taking to training, and remember, these are young horses, relatively speaking.
Yeah, right.
3-year-old horses. So look at Epicenter, which is seeking now. It's I think it's 6th straight win, but started slowly. So now it's really hitting his stride. And his most recent start in the Louisiana Derby was pretty good.
Well, all right. So look, I feel like those are some pretty good picks. I could get my mind wrapped around that. I'm increasingly now, as I'm thinking about what I'm going to start asking you next, Andy, you're like the Ruthless Variety Program vice congressman. Like all of our vices are what you represent. if we've got a problem, you represent it.
Notice that as well. My colleagues will. They see me coming on the House floor. Oh gosh, here comes Barr. What is it? It's some horse racing or bourbon bill.
Well, I don't know there's anything that we can be more supportive of, frankly, here at the Variety Program. Let's talk bourbon. First of all, for all the listeners, if you haven't been down on the Bourbon Trail, you should do it. It's an incredible experience. People take this incredibly seriously, as they should, because it's become just a massive industry. But what's so unique about this massive industry, in my experience, is although it's grown to proportions that I don't think anybody envisioned, they have a very boutique feel to it, right? It's still done at a very local, handcrafted level, which is just so neat.
It is. And a lot of these are family owned businesses. Now, some of them, obviously, these distilleries have sold out to big, gigantic distilled spirits companies like Diageo or Sazerac or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But the distilleries themselves, some of them still are family owned, like Brown-Forman, and they're privately held. But some of them are public companies now, or part of public companies. But still, all of them maintain their rural character. A lot of these distilleries are in rural Kentucky. There's a multi-generation family tradition. These master distillers are true craftsmen and now craftswomen. We have many women who are getting into the business, but they're all benefiting from this renaissance of aged distilled spirits, especially bourbon. And of course, we all know, and your former boss, Mitch McConnell, says it very well, that we know that all bourbon has to be made in the United States. 95% of it is distilled and aged in Kentucky, but the other 5% is counterfeit.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's exactly right. I remember a story. So he had to do an event with Chuck Schumer, and I think Chuck Schumer came to Kentucky. It was like for college kids, maybe it's the McConnell Center or something like that. And Schumer handed him a bottle of what he claimed was New York bourbon, of which, it's like a gift, and so everybody's like, applauding, and McConnell just straight face looks at this thing, like not a muscle moves in his face. And he turns it around and he looks at the back and he's like, he points it to Chuck, bottled in Kentucky.
Yeah, and actually, for those of us who really know bourbon, us Kentuckians, there's a reason why the bourbon capital is Kentucky. Bourbon was invented here. The pioneers, when they came over the Appalachian Mountains and they settled here, they overproduced the corn, and there was a lot of white oak. And what were they going to do with this excess corn? They were typically on creeks near mills, and those creeks fed into the Kentucky River, which fed into the Ohio River, which fed into the Mississippi River. And what they ended up discovering is that as they put the distilled corn, liquid corn, into these barrels, they aged it, and they sent that whiskey down the river. It ended up in New Orleans. And I've always told my buddy Steve Scalise, the House Republican whip, that he may claim Mardi Gras, but we created it with our Kentucky whiskey.
You exported it. You guys are responsible for New Orleans. I get it now. Right.
And all those French from the Bourbon region of France started telling all those Kentucky producers about what they thought of the whiskey from Kentucky, and that's how bourbon was born. And now we've developed this huge industry in Kentucky because of the limestone topography that we have that produces the best water for our bourbon. And then here's the real secret and why New York could never compete, or Texas can never compete with Kentucky, is that we have 4 distinct seasons in central Kentucky. We have a relatively cold winter, we have a very hot and humid summer, and we have temperate and cool springs and falls, and there are 4 distinct seasons. And that's the perfect aging weather climate, because you put those white oak barrels full of that distillate into these rick houses, and that distillate goes in and out and breathes in and out of that charred white oak as it ages over the course of 5 to 10 to even 20 years, and it makes for the best whiskey in the world.
Oh, there's just no question about it. It's not even close. I mean, it really, but you know what, the funny thing, and I learned this when I was working for McConnell, is the challenge of any sort of industry that's sort of unique to a state like this, that goes through the epic growth that it has and has become, just a international sensation in a lot of ways, is you got to look back and try to figure out, like, is it taxed correctly? So much about the bourbon industry blew up without federal guidelines sort of understanding exactly what it is that we're dealing with from an American export and even domestically. Right. And I imagine you spend a lot of time trying to figure that out.
Absolutely. I mean, the Bourbon Caucus is not just about celebrating this distinctively American spirit and having fun with it. It's a big business. There's a lot of jobs, and and it's a very tax and trade sensitive industry. And so we've had to really go to bat for the industry, and we've been somewhat successful on the tax front with the reduction in the federal excise tax on distilled spirits. But my bill to level the playing field, I think, was one of my great accomplishments for the bourbon industry. We called it the Aged Distilled Spirits Competitiveness Act. And it deals with the fact that bourbon and other aged distilled spirits was discriminated against just because we aged it. Whereas vodka and gin and other non-aged distilled spirits were able to write off the interest expenses when the distillate goes into the bottle. We had to age ours, and our distillers couldn't recover the interest costs until it went into the bottle. Well, that was a big deal because they had to incur all these interest expenses. Think of it like a mortgage. If we've got this mortgage interest deduction, think if you could not deduct the interest on your mortgage until you sold your house at the end of owning it.
Right.
We now allow these distilleries to deduct the interest every year, and that levels the playing field between bourbon and aged distilled spirits and non-aged distilled spirits. So we are in a much better, more competitive position relative to these other distilled spirits.
I love it. Well, you got a champion in you, Andy Barr. You've never taken your eye off the ball on that. I know we've got some more work to do with beer and wine and parody and everything else, but I know you're on top of everything. You have a story about McConnell and Trump, which there's no way that I'm going to be able to leave that on the table. You got to tell this.
Well, it was really, I feel like I was a witness to history in many respects. And this actually happened on Air Force One in March of 2017. That was a little over 1 year after Justice Antonin Scalia had passed away. And of course, you recall the big decision that Leader Mitch McConnell had to make, and a decision that many of us who are members of the Federalist Society, conservatives, those who believe in originalism and the proper role of the federal judiciary, we will always admire Leader McConnell for his strength in that moment to decide and decisively and in a principled way decide that the American people were going to decide the next Supreme Court justice to replace Justice Scalia. And so he waited. He waited until after the intervening election in November of 2020. That turned out to be a great decision because President Trump did a great thing. He nominated Neil Gorsuch to be the next justice on the United States Supreme Court. And President Trump was absolutely right to be very proud of that decision, that nomination. So this is during the pendency of the nomination. President Trump had made the announcement. We were on Air Force One traveling to Louisville, Kentucky, to one of those mega Make America Great Again rallies. The president was on fire. He had a great rally, and we were heading back to the Louisville airport. We got on Air Force One, headed back to Andrews Air Force Base. And the Air Force officer invited me, Leader McConnell, and Congressman Jamie Comer to join the president in his office on Air Force One, along with Rick Dearborn, who was the head of
Rick.
legislative affairs. So that was the extent of the folks who were in the room. And, President Trump was rightly congratulating himself about this nomination. And those of us who know and have followed President Trump, he was very enthusiastic about the wisdom of his choice. And he went on for a pretty good while with his monologue about how this was the greatest choice ever to the United States Supreme Court. And at some point, after about 10 minutes or so, the president took a breath. And at that moment, it was a little uncomfortable because we all kind of recognized that who was ultimately responsible for the president's ability to make that nomination was sitting right next to the president. That was Mitch McConnell. And when there was a pause in the action, Leader McConnell didn't miss a beat. He kind of leaned forward and he said, Mr. President, when are you going to thank me for that?
That's so good. That's so good.
I won't go into the exchange that followed, but needless to say, it was an entertaining point. I really feel like that was a moment for the history books.
Well, it certainly was, and if you consider the news from this week, boy oh boy, was it consequential. And again, if you're a appreciator of anything conservative court rulings, conservative legal philosophy, a seminal moment. You indeed, sir, were witness to history.
Absolutely. And, this leak at the Supreme Court is a shameful episode in the history of the Supreme Court, unprecedented. And I think it will go down as a outrageous effort to politicize and undermine the credibility and the independence of the Supreme Court. It will have ramifications for years to come, unfortunately. And my hope is that Chief Justice Roberts' investigation results in finding the individual who's responsible, holding them accountable under the code of conduct for judicial employees. That individual, likely, probably a law clerk for a pro-abortion justice, should be not only dismissed as an employee of the court, but should be disbarred.
Yeah, no, that's really well said, and I can't emphasize that enough from my perspective too. It's just a total breach of protocol, and it throws the entire system into a complete chaos that, unfortunately, I think you're right, we're going to be dealing with for years to come. Andy, thanks for that. Listen, before I get you out of here, I got to ask you 3 questions.
Sure.
The first one is, if you can plan your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Well, it would consist of bourbon.
Yeah. Is it just bourbon, or do you have to marinate something in bourbon?
Well, in Kentucky, we have this great stew called burgoo.
Oh, God. And you're going there.
Burgoo. And we also have beer cheese. So we have beer cheese and burgoo. And so I'd probably have some beer cheese on some crackers. I'd have my burgoo, which is a beef stew with some vegetables.
It's beef. It hasn't always been beef, Andy. You know that as well as I do.
That's right. We raise cattle in Kentucky too, not just horses. So we got the beef stew, and then I've got to put my classic Kentucky dish, which is the hot brown.
Oh yeah,
which is named after the Brown Hotel in Louisville. So it'd be an all Kentucky last meal. It would start with a little appetizer with the beer cheese from Winchester, Kentucky, and then I'd go up from Halls on the River, and then I'd get my burgoo for my stew, and then I'd eat my hot brown, which is a toast turkey. It's got a slice of tomato on it and melted cheddar cheese with 2 slices of crispy bacon on top.
It's a beautiful thing.
Since it's my last meal, I don't have to worry about cholesterol, so I'd have no guilt in having my hot brown, and then I'd wash it all down with a 23-year Pappy Van Winkle.
There you go. There, I knew that was coming. Well, listen, I appreciate the Kentucky-centric answer. If you wanted pure authenticity points, though, Andy, you'd have the squirrel burgoo.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Second question, I'm actually interested in your answer on this because you've been involved in public service for quite some time, dedicated your life to it. If you never got into politics at all, like if you just had this big sort of hole in the middle of your career where you can blue sky literally anything, you could be absolutely anything and dedicate your time to whatever it is you want, what would that be?
Blue sky is appropriate for the answer because it would be a Kentucky blue sky. I would be a Kentucky basketball radio commentator. I would spend my whole life studying the roster, recruiting, talking about national championships, how we need to overcome Kansas's national championship and win more games to regain our status as the winningest program in the history of college basketball. 8 national championships. I'm a huge Kentucky basketball fan. I'm a junkie. I'm a friend of Coach John Calipari, and he's a hell of a guy.
He's a hell of a guy. I remember the first meeting I had with Calipari. McConnell told me he produces more millionaires than anybody out there, and at Calipari, I think Calipari liked that.
He definitely does that. And one of my favorite stories, I was interviewed by Andy Katz on ESPN Radio, and he asked me, so what's the difference between a congressman and a senator? I said, well, I'll tell you the difference. I'm a congressman and I'm a Kentucky basketball fan. Mitch McConnell is a senator and he is a Kentucky basketball fan and a Louisville Cardinal basketball fan.
Yeah, right. It's that whole statewide thing.
That's right.
Although he went to both schools. So
that's the difference between a congressman and a senator.
That's exactly right. All right. So that makes total sense. And by the way, you can be a huge improvement over Matt Jones. I may be a little bit of a bias on that, but I won't ask you to comment.
Agree.
All right. So third question. this gets a little bit tricky, but our view is that every person is motivated by one of two things: the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. And it's not that anybody enjoys defeat or likes, losing or anything like that. It's that there's always a sunny optimist sort of charging up the hill, trying to get to the next deal, the glass half full, classic human being, right? The other side of it, in the agony of defeat person, is every victory they've had lasts about like 5 minutes. And every defeat or setback that they've ever had, they take with them. They wear it like a backpack, and they work against that to vow either not to repeat it or to overcome any challenge that they've had in life. And those are kind of the two poles. Andy, where do you find you?
I'm thrilled of victory, but I am sympathetic to the agony of defeat argument because I believe in persistence. One of my favorite presidents is a Republican. President was Calvin Coolidge, who has this great quote about persistence. He says that the slogan "Press on" will always solve the problems of the human race. And my life has been, and my political career has really been characterized by persistence. I think I lost my first race for Congress by 647 votes against the incumbent Democrat. I came back 2 years later, defeated that same incumbent Democrat. And so I always looked at that first campaign as phase one of a two-phase fight, not as a loss, but as a two-phase fight. Yeah. I believe in persistence, and that was the thrill of victory that second round. And in a more recent campaign, in a tough cycle for Republicans, I was able to overcome a $20 million campaign against us by Amy McGrath.
I've heard that name somewhere before.
Yeah, and what I loved about that campaign was here was someone who, admittedly had a very admirable military career and service that we all respected, but she had no clue about what the district was where she was attempting to run and the people she was attempting to represent. She had never lived in the district. The liberals had recruited her to come into my district because they thought I was the only beatable Republican incumbent in Kentucky. And I always laughed when I saw these Federal Election Commission reports and the millions of dollars she was raising from coastal elites who thought that she actually had a chance, when she was totally out of touch with the actual constituents she was seeking to represent. So I kind of felt like they were just burning all of that money as they sent it from New York and Boston and Seattle and Los Angeles into Kentucky. And I feel like that the thrill of that victory really is a highlight of my congressional career.
You did a hell of a job, and that was a tough race, and you beat her so badly she decided to run for Senate and get rung up by 20. So I think that the narratives that you have put in place about her not understanding Kentucky played out pretty well on the statewide level too.
Yeah, and when we were always criticized for running a tough or negative campaign, it was basically those TV ads were my opponent in her own words, and I always said, look, if this is a negative campaign, she's running a negative campaign against herself.
Exactly. It's her own words. Well, listen, you are the absolute best. Your daughter's doing all right?
Yeah, they're doing great. I appreciate that. They're getting ready for Derby as well, and they're very, very busy these days, doing well in school, and they're active in tennis and gymnastics and soccer and all kinds of extracurricular activities.
Well, you're a hero to a lot of us in more ways than one. Congressman Andy Barr, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the Derby. I'm coming after you if these picks don't come through for me.
Thanks, Josh, and happy Derby, everyone.